So to understand how the prayer times come in and go out, you need to know how the sun goes from the east to the west and how the shadows go like that while the sun is going across the sky from the east to the west. How do the shadows turn and some of the different things that happen. So let's try to describe it, inshallah ta'ala. As you know, the sun rises in the east and it sets in the west. All right? When the sun first rises, so it's just cracking the horizon and coming up. It's rising in the east, and the sun is casting shadows over the surface of the earth, and the shadows will be pointing towards the west, and they will be long. So when the sun is first rising in the east, the shadows will be pointing towards the west, and they will be long. The sun rises and rises and rises. As the sun rises, the shadows get shorter and shorter and shorter. As the sun gets higher and higher, the shadows get shorter and shorter. Not only that, as the sun is going towards the west, the shadows are turning towards the east. So the sun is doing two things. It's getting higher until it reaches a certain point, and it won't go any higher. Then it'll start to come down. And it's going towards the west. As the sun gets higher and higher, the shadows get shorter and shorter. As the sun heads westward, the shadows turn and go towards the east. If you're not very familiar with north, east, south, and west, then you should familiarize yourself with that. I mean, where is your east, where is your west, and your north, and your south? You should become so familiar with that if you are facing any one direction, you know where all the other ones are. So if you're facing north, you know which way is east and west. Forget south, you know which way is south. You should know your directions to the extent that if you're facing north, you know which way is east and west. You already know which way is south. If you're facing east, you should know which way is north and south. So if you're facing south, you should know which way is east and west. If you're facing west, you should know which way is north and south, without being confused and having to think about it, etc. The sun gets higher and higher until it reaches its highest point of the day, which is called the zenith. Or in Arabic it's called al-istiwa. Zenith is an English word. That's the real noon. True noon is when the sun reaches its zenith, not 12 p.m. Also, I slightly digress. The morning starts with the dawn, not at 12 a.m. So if you're thinking this way, that if it's 12 or 1 or 2 or 3, that it's morning time, no, it's not morning time. It's still nighttime. The night is from Maghrib until Fajr. Fajr time, the morning starts. 12 a.m. is still nighttime. In fact, it's the dead middle of the night. So the sun gets to a point where it won't go any higher. That's its zenith. When the sun is at its highest point of the day, the shadows are at their shortest point of the day. And all of the shadows increase and decrease at the same rate. It means it doesn't matter how long the object is casting the shadow. You could have one object that's 50 feet long, another object that's 1 foot long. I'm using feet. Maybe a lot of you use meters, use the metric system. You might have something that's 10 meters long, another thing that's 1 meter long, etc. So obviously, the longer an object is, the longer its shadow will be. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm saying is the rate at which the shadows increase and decrease is the same. It's not like if I had a pole next to a tree, that the tree's shadow will grow and the pole's shadow won't go anywhere, right? Okay. So when the sun is at its zenith, at its highest point in the day, the shadows will be at their shortest point of the day. Since the sun is at its highest point of the day, it won't go any higher, so what's left for it to do but to start declining, to start going down. So the sun will start to decline from its zenith into the west. When the sun is at its zenith, it's between east and west. It will only be there for a moment, and then it will come out of its zenith into the west, descending now, not going any higher. Once the sun goes into the west, the shadows turn towards the east. Then, as the sun declines and declines and declines, the shadows get longer and longer and longer. So you'll notice that the longest shadows of the day are the shadows in the morning and the shadows in the late evening before the sun goes down. You know, evening anyway in English, this word evening, it refers to the end of the daytime and the beginning of the nighttime. So the word evening transcends the daytime into the nighttime. The sun will decline and decline and decline. The shadows will get longer and longer and longer until the disk of the sun goes completely below the horizon. When the disk of the sun goes completely below the horizon, if it's a clear day, not a cloudy day, there will be redness in the western horizon, the red twilight. How long this redness lasts depends on the season and where you are on Earth. So you might be somewhere where that redness lasts 20 minutes, or that redness might last an hour and a half, or that redness might last all night long, and then it will go away. So on a clear day, when the disk of the sun goes down completely below the horizon, there will be a redness in the western horizon. This redness will last for as long as it lasts, and then eventually it will just disappear. Then you have night. The night started when the sun went down, but that redness will go away, and then it will just be the blackness of night, and the stars will start popping out more and more. The stars will start coming out when the redness is in the western horizon, but they don't just all come out right away. You never saw the sun went down and then all of a sudden the sky was full of stars. As far as I know. I mean, I don't know if there's any place on Earth that actually happens, but it doesn't usually work like that. The redness will disappear, and then the stars will come out more and more. And that lasts all night long, however long night lasts. Again, it depends on the season and where you are on Earth. Until there's a light in the eastern horizon. A white light in the eastern horizon. Horizon means from side to side, not up and down. Vertical is up and down. Horizontal is side to side. When you see a light that goes across the horizon from side to side, not a light that goes up into the sky. A white light in the eastern horizon. Now the night is over and the dawn has commenced. That light will grow and grow. Then you'll see blue. The blue of the sky will start to come out. And then eventually it starts getting mixed with redness. And that redness gets stronger and stronger until eventually the sun cracks the horizon. The tip of the disk of the sun will break the horizon, will pop up. Then the sun will rise. When the sun rises, it rises from which direction? The east. That's the direction you saw that white light in the eastern horizon that we just talked about, in the east. When the sun rises in the east, the shadows will be very long, facing towards the west. And then it goes all over again. But I'm not finished yet. I want to describe it again because I left out some details the first time, so as not to just pile too much on you at one time. So the sun rises in the east. The sun rises in the east and the shadows will be facing towards the west. Now, a detail I didn't mention for you the first time was, okay, the sun rises in the east and it sets in the west, but there's still two other directions. Do the north and the south have anything to do with the sun's pathway or the sun's orbit? Yes. Depends on what part of the world you live in. I live in what they call the northern hemisphere, the northern half, they say, of the globe. So being in the northern hemisphere means that the sun rises in the east, sets in the west, but which way does it run? How does it get from the east to the west? Through the northern side of the sky or the southern side of the sky? It runs in the southern sky for me. Being a person who lives in the northern part of the world, the sun runs through the southern sky. If you live in the southern part of the world, like an Aussie, it's really hard for me to make that accent. I try. I don't know how you guys do it without like stretching your cheeks or something. But anyway, if you live in Australia, for example, if you live in Australia, then the sun still rises in the east, sets in the west, but it runs in the northern sky for you. What does that mean, that it runs in the northern sky or runs in the southern sky? What that basically means is this. When the sun reaches its zenith, which means it's between the east and the west. If it's at its zenith, it's in the middle between east and west. At that point, once it's between east and west, then for me being in the northern part of the world, if I face the sun while it's at its zenith, I will be facing the south. And if I turn my back to the sun while it's at its zenith, I'll be facing the north. Because for me, the sun runs in the southern sky. If you were in Australia, for example, and the sun was at its zenith, and you faced the sun, then you will be facing the north. And if you turn your back to the sun in Australia while it's at its zenith, then you'll be facing the south. So if you live in the southern part of the world, then the sun runs in the northern sky. And if you live in the northern part of the world, the sun runs in the southern sky. Which means, if you understand that, it means that the sun runs like right through the center of the earth. Runs over the center of the earth, which is what they call the equator. The sun runs over the equator. There's 3 lines on the map. The equator is in the middle, and then there's 2 lines. One line north of the equator, they call it the Tropic of Cancer. And another line that's south of the equator, they call it the Tropic of Capricorn. So the sun runs between these lines, between these 2 tropics, which is basically the middle of the world. So if you live in the northern part of the world, that means the equator is to your south, right? So then the sun runs in the southern sky for you. And if you live in the southern part of the world, so the equator is to your north, that means that the sun runs in the northern sky for you. So the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, and for me, it runs in the southern sky. So how will the shadows be? When the sun is first rising, the shadows will be very long. Since the sun is rising from the east, the shadows will be pointing towards which direction? I'm asking. Since the sun is rising in the east, the shadows will be facing which direction? West. So now let's add an element that we skipped the first time. And for me, since the sun is running in the southern sky, it means that the shadows are also facing which direction? Nope. If the sun is running in the south, if the sun is in the south, then the shadows should be which way? When the sun is in the east, the shadows are in the west, pointing west. When the sun is going down in the west, the shadows are pointing east. So if the sun is in the south, then the shadows should also be towards the north. For me, then in the morning, the sun will be rising in the east, so the shadows are pointing west. The sun rises and starts to take its course, to run its orbit, going in the southern sky. So that means that how are the shadows going from west to east? Didn't we say that when the sun tilts over into the west, the shadows will turn towards the east? Yes, but which way for me? Through the north. You understand? So the shadows in the morning will be facing the west, and as the sun rises, since it's running in the southern sky, the shadows are going to be turning towards the east, going slowly towards the east by way of north. So they're turning north, 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 north. Eventually, as the sun gets higher and higher and the shadows get shorter and shorter, the sun will reach its highest point in the sky. So the shadows reach their shortest point of the day. The sun reaches its highest point of the day. So the shadows reach their shortest point of the day. Didn't I say that if the sun, for me, is at its zenith, it's between the east and the west? So which way should the shadows be pointing? If the sun is between east and west, and it's in the southern sky, which way should the shadows be pointing? Okay, I'll tell you the answer. If the sun is between the east and the west, and for me, it's in the southern sky, that means it's in the south, then the shadows should be facing due north, exactly north. For me, when the sun is at its zenith, the shadows should be due north. because the sun runs in the southern sky. If it's between the east and the west, that means it's not in the east and it's not in the west. It's dead smack in the middle between east and west. Then when I face the sun at that point, I should be facing due south. And my back should be to the north and the shadows should be facing the north. Then the sun will decline out of its zenith. It only stays there for a moment. So if you want to catch the zenith, you need to be on point. That means if you want to catch the zenith, you need to be ready before the zenith, because the zenith lasts only for a moment. The sun will decline out of its zenith. It won't go any higher, so it has to start declining into the west. So since the sun is now going into the west, the shadows are tilting towards the east. So now the shadows are northeast. And the sun gets lower and lower and lower, chasing after the west, yani going towards the west. And the shadows are turning more and more and more towards the east until the sun goes down below the horizon. Is this clear so far? The part about the shadows being due north, is that clear? Is there any questions so far? Excuse me. Then the disk of the sun will go below the horizon. And if it's a clear day, then there will be a redness in that western horizon. Eventually, that redness will fade away, and it will be the black of night. And eventually, the stars will pop out. A lot of stars will be out. And this lasts until a white light across the eastern horizon. This light will grow and grow, and then the blueness of the sky will eventually start to become clear, and then that white light starts becoming mixed with redness, and that redness intensifies until the disk of the sun cracks the horizon. Then the disk of the sun will rise, and the shadows will be facing towards the west, and it goes all over again and again and again and again. So, where do the prayer times fit in? The sun will rise and rise and rise until it reaches its zenith. That's when the shadows are at the shortest point of the day. Take note of that shadow. Dhuhr time didn't even start yet. While the sun is at its zenith, Dhuhr didn't start yet. So before Dhuhr even comes in, designate an object. See how long it is. When the sun reaches its zenith, measure the shadow of that object that you designated and add those two lengths together. How long is the object and how long is its shadow when the sun is at its zenith? Add those two lengths together. We'll come back to talk about it, inshallah. And when the shadow gets that long, Asr comes in. And so now you're going to know when Asr comes in before Dhuhr even started. Because Dhuhr doesn't start until the sun declines out of its zenith into the west. Once the sun tilts towards the west from its zenith, Dhuhr starts. And if you did your work, you're already going to know how long the shadow is going to be when Asr starts. So the sun will decline and decline, and the shadows will be getting longer and longer until the shadows reach a certain length. At that point, Asr starts. Asr stays in, and the sun declines and declines, gets close to the horizon, it's ready to set. Now it's like orangey yellow. It's not difficult to actually stare at it if you want to. It won't hurt your eyes if you stare at the sun at that point. If you reach the point where you can stare into the sun before the sun goes down and it doesn't hurt your eyes, and the light of the sun on the walls and buildings is yellow, then praying Asr at that time is disliked if you have no excuse for delaying it and you have no reward for your Asr prayer at that time. No reward, not just a decreased reward. There's no reward for an Asr that's delayed until that time without an excuse. Of course, it's not haram, but there's no reward. So make sure you get your Asr in before that time. Then the sun will go down. The disk of the sun will set below the horizon. And Maghrib comes in. When the complete disk of the sun is below the horizon, Maghrib is in. Even if there's still sun rays shooting up in the western horizon. The disk of the sun itself is down, but its sun rays are still rising up into the sky. There's no judgment linked to these sun rays. You don't have to worry about anything. Those sun rays have no religious judgment attached to them. The religious judgment is attached to the disk of the sun. So when the disk of the sun goes down, completely down below the horizon, then Maghrib is in. Maghrib will last as long as that redness is present, and eventually that redness will dissipate, and then Isha will be in. Then eventually the stars pop out in multitudes, and Isha is in through the night, until there's a white light in the eastern horizon. Now Fajr is in. Fajr lasts until the disk of the sun cracks the horizon. It is disliked to delay your Fajr until the redness of the eastern horizon becomes intense. So if you performed your Fajr prayer at the time of the intensity of the redness, and that is disliked if you have no excuse, so be keen to perform your Fajr prayer before that. Then when the sun cracks the horizon, the Fajr prayer time is over and there's no obligatory prayer time. Then the sun will rise and the shadows will be long, facing towards the west. And the sun rises and rises and rises, and the shadows get shorter and shorter and shorter until the sun reaches its zenith. Then you check your designated object and its shadow. How long is the object? How long is its shadow at the zenith time? Put those two lengths together. And then when the shadow gets that long as those two lengths together, when the shadow gets that long later on, Asr will be in. Then the sun will decline out of its zenith and Dhuhr will come in. The sun is declining and declining. The shadows are getting longer and longer until Asr comes in. Now the sun is getting lower and lower. You don't have to concern yourself with the shadows anymore. Asr came in, but the shadows will get longer and longer until the sun goes below the horizon. Now Maghrib is in. Maghrib lasts as long as that redness lasts, and then Isha is in. Isha will last for the duration of the night until that light in the eastern horizon, then Fajr is in. Fajr will last until the sun cracks the horizon, then Fajr goes out and there's no obligatory prayer time, and the sun will rise until it gets to its zenith. Check your shadows for Asr, and then the sun tilts out of its zenith into the west. Now Dhuhr is in, and so it goes. That's clear? Okay. Let's read now. The author said, times of the prayer. The beginning of the time of Dhuhr prayer is the declination of the sun, i.e., it's declining from the middle of the sky into the west. And its end is when every shadow is as long as the object casting the shadow. Because remember that the shadows of all the objects increase and decrease at the same rate. So its end is when every shadow is as long as the object casting the shadow plus the length the shadow had when the sun was at its zenith. Meaning, when the length of the shadow becomes equal to the length of what casts it, what casts the shadow, in addition to the length of the object's shadow when the sun was in the middle of the sky. Meaning, when the length of the shadow becomes equal to the length of what casts it, in addition to the length of the object's shadow when the sun was in the middle of the sky, its zenith. And the beginning of the Asr prayer time is by the ending of Dhuhr time. So the time of the second one, Asr, starts immediately after the ending of the first one, Dhuhr, meaning there's no space or gap in between Dhuhr and Asr. As soon as Dhuhr ends, Asr begins immediately. And its end, i.e. the time of Asr, the end of Asr, is by the complete setting of the disk of the sun, even if there are still sun rays. The beginning of the time of Maghrib prayer is the complete setting of the sun, so there's no gap in between Asr and Maghrib. And its end is with the disappearance of the red twilight, which is the redness that exists in the western horizon after the setting of the sun. The beginning of the time of Isha prayer is the setting of the red twilight, meaning the disappearance of the red twilight. Even if there is still some yellowness or whiteness in the horizon. That's according to Ash-Shafi'i. Other scholars have linked the prayer time to other than the redness. According to Ash-Shafi'i, the prayer time is linked to the redness, not to a different color. And its end is by the breaking of the true dawn, which is a white light that appears in the eastern horizon. It starts out thin, then it gradually spreads and expands little by little. They refer to the true dawn to exclude the false dawn, which is a white vertical lightness which appears, then disappears. Yani a light that goes up into the sky before Fajr comes in. The time of dawn does not start by its appearance. And the beginning of the time of dawn prayer, as-subh, is the appearance of the true dawn, and its end is by the rising of the first piece of the disk of the sun. If you have a question, go ahead and ask. What are examples of excuses for delaying the Asr and Fajr to the times when it is disliked to pray them? Like you forgot to pray, or you just woke up, or you were busy. Even if you were just busy, means that you have errands to do and you need to get them done. You're saying to yourself, I need to pray Asr, I need to pray Asr. I just got to get this stuff out of the way, and then I'm going to pray. So that's an excuse. But just to sit back, watch a game, play video games or something like that, no.